Hello everybody. It's John again, and this time I'm going to quickly show you some of the functions that you can do with the basic panel within Lightroom. So again, this is a photograph I took last year. It's up on the Isle of Skye, and it's the Trottenish Ridge at dawn. So I'm just going to reset all of the settings we have here so we can see what we're starting with. And it's a fairly dark, it's a fairly flat image. And so let's see where we start. So if we look at first look at the histogram, we can see the histogram here is actually quite well spread out. It's good exposure because we've got nothing lost in terms of highlights. There's no clipping there. We've got no shadows lost, but it's still quite dull. So let's have a look and see what we can do. I'm going to open up the shadows on this. This will bring a bit more light into the darker areas. It's about there. And I'm just going to pull down the highlights just so these houses aren't quite so eye-catching. And that might get us slightly better reflections. Now, I'm going to do the white and black points. Now, one way we can do this is to hold down the Shift key and double click on those. Alternatively, we can hold down the Alt key in Windows and the Option key in the Mac and slide the white point slider. Now, as you notice, the screen has gone black, and as we move the slider to the right, we start to see pixels appear. At that point, that's when we want to stop moving the white point slider. We can do the same thing with the black point. This time it goes white, and the moment we start to see black points appear, we should be stopping. Although with a black point slider you can actually push it a little bit more, because these are going to be areas in shadow which, if we lose detail, it doesn't matter quite so much. Next, I'm going to just touch clarity. The clarity does local contrast, which gives the impression of sharpening. Again, if we go all the way down to the left, we can see it's made things quite soft and quite blurred. Now, you might want to do that if you're doing portraits. If we go the other way, it makes things quite crunchy and quite grungy. You can get away with that sometimes if that's the look you're looking for. But for me personally, I tend not to go much further than about there. This just gives you a little bit of detail in the ground and in the ridge there. Now then, we've now got an option. We can either go with saturation or we go with vibrance. If we go with saturation and take it all the way to the left, that's quite clearly gone monochrome. And if we go all the way to the right, we start to get greens which are quite radioactive, and the light on the houses and on the ridge starts to look a little bit unrealistic. The problem with saturation is it'll saturate colours that are not already saturated. So let's just double click on that to reset it. If we do vibrance on the other hand, take the vibrance all the way down, we can still see hints of colour in there. But if we push vibrance all the other way up, then we don't saturate colours that are already saturated. This is really good for doing skin tones. Skin tones don't get saturated, so that's nice. But I don't want to go that far with vibrance, so I'm just going to pull this back a little bit just to add just a touch. We can just see in the houses there, we've just got a little bit of yellow coming through. In terms of contrast, well, the contrast is actually pretty good. But if we take the contrast down, we get some quite a flat image, and if we go all the way up the other way, it gets quite crunchy. I don't really want that, so I'm going to leave the contrast as it is, or maybe just push it just a smidgen, just a tiny bit, something around there. Similarly with exposure, take it all the way down, it goes black, all the way up it goes pretty much white. So you want to go somewhere in the middle, and you can slide this up and down if you want to adjust the exposure of the photo. So I'm actually quite happy with the exposure of this, so I'm going to leave it as it is. Then we've got two controls here. One does the temperature, color temperature, and the other one does tint. These are the white balance controls. So if we move the white balance all the way down to the left, obviously we've gone quite cold, so it's gone blue. If we go all the other way, it's gone quite yellow, which is, you know, the warm colours. And then we can then start putting tints in here, which you would want to use this if you get a colour cast in your image. But I'm just going to reset that back to as it was shot, because that was actually about right. Now another way, if I reset this, another way of actually setting these things is just to click on the auto button here above the exposure slider, and that will analyse the photo and push everything to how Lightroom thinks it should be. Sometimes it does a pretty good job, but it doesn't always, in my opinion. So I'm actually going to adjust this. I want to bring that exposure back down to 0. I'd like to bring the contrast back down to 0, and I'm going to push shadows up much more than that because I think it'll take it. And we just drop the shadows, the highlights down a bit more than that. Let's bump clarity, put the saturation back, sorry, the vibrance back, and that's it really. That's all I want to do on this panel. Thanks for listening.